In June 2024, a remarkable skull was unearthed in Mexico City and is dated to 10,500 years old, but a peer-reviewed paper has not been released yet. However, according to some anthropologists, the layer where Yotzin was found corresponds to a period dated at another important site in the Basin of Mexico, named Tlapacoya, to between 20,000 and 25,000 before present. The skull is very robust and reminiscent of some ancient Australian Aboriginal skulls. If these dates were confirmed, they would represent some of the earliest evidence of human presence in the Americas, challenging the dominant theories about when the New World was first settled. The evidence supporting these earlier dates includes the remains of a black bear and 2 deer species found in refuse deposits linked to hearths dated to roughly 22,000 years ago, as well as a curved obsidian blade uncovered beneath a buried tree trunk. The animal bones have been dated to approximately 24,000 years and 21,700 years before present. The obsidian blade, lying under a tree trunk dated to 24,000 years before present, was itself dated by obsidian hydration analysis to between 21,250 and 25,000 years before present. The skull, as known as Yotzin, an almost complete skeleton found in a flexed position with an elongated skull and severely worn teeth, suggests using teeth as tools. Yotzin is a robust skeleton, with a lot of bone mass, and both the upper and lower part of the jaw have severe wear and tear. Yotzin is around 5.74 feet in height, which is extremely tall for a person of his time, and is estimated to have been 25 to 30 years old when he was buried in the flexed or fetal position. The discovery of a 15,000-year-old mammoth hunting site in Mexico preserves not only the bones of the giant Ice Age beasts, but also is one of the most extraordinary archaeological finds in the Americas. This site, known as Santa Isabel Istapan, lies in the Basin of Mexico, a high-altitude plateau that was once a vast network of interconnected lakes, marshes and grasslands during the late Pleistocene. It offers a vivid glimpse into the skills, strategies and lifeways of Paleo-Indian hunters, while also connecting to some of the most important early human skeletal finds in the region, such as Yotzin, Penon woman, Chimalhuacan man, and the Tlapacoya skull. Together, these discoveries tell a powerful story of human life in central Mexico at the end of the Ice Age, when climate shifts, megafauna and human ingenuity intersected in a landscape rich in both opportunity and danger at the southern end of the Mammoth Range, not far from the tropical Mayan heartland of Central America. The Santa Isabel Istapan site came to light during dredging operations in what was then the bed of a former lake. Workers uncovered enormous bones that were quickly recognized as belonging to Columbian mammoths, the great grazing proboscideans that roamed North America from the northern plains to central Mexico. What made this discovery exceptional was not simply the presence of mammoth remains, but the clear evidence of human involvement in their death and processing. Archaeologists recovered stone tools, including bifaces and large points, in direct association with the bones. The Basin of Mexico at that time was a cooler, semi-arid environment compared to the modern climate, yet it was still dominated by large bodies of water such as Lake Texcoco, Lake Xaltocan, and Lake Chalco. These lakes were surrounded by grassy plains, reed beds and marshlands, forming an ecosystem that supported herds of mammoth, horse, camel and bison. For humans, this environment offered abundant resources. The lakeshores provided fish, waterfowl and aquatic plants, while the plains offered grazing animals that could be tracked and hunted. It was also a place where water concentrated game, creating natural opportunities for ambush. The people who hunted at Santa Isabel Istapan were not simply opportunistic scavengers. The layout of the site, the choice of location and the weaponry suggest planning and cooperation. Mammoths were formidable prey, standing up to 4 meters at the shoulder and weighing several tons. Bringing one down would have required not just physical courage, but also coordination and knowledge of the animal's behavior. The hunters probably knew where the herds moved seasonally and may have timed their hunts to coincide with the dry season when the lake shores contracted and animals concentrated at fewer watering points. Once a mammoth was killed, the hunters would have set to work quickly to butcher it before the meat spoiled or was claimed by predators. The bones at Santa Isabel Istapan show clear cut marks where meat was removed, and some bones were left in place while others may have been broken for marrow. The meat could have fed a community for weeks, and the hide, bones and ivory would have been used for shelter, tools and ornaments. What makes Santa Isabel Istapan even more significant is its connection to the broader story of early human occupation in the Basin of Mexico. Just a short distance from the site, in the former bed of Lake Texcoco, another remarkable find was made in the early 20th century. This was the skeleton known as Penon woman, and when discovered, had threads of natural fibres still attached to her pelvis, possibly from a skirt. She may have worn sandals made of reeds such as those found in the dry Great Basin of Oregon, dated to 10,000 years ago. Penon woman is one of the oldest directly dated human remains in the Americas, with a radiocarbon date of roughly 12,750 years old. Other ancient female skulls of North America include Naya of the Yucatan, La Brea woman of California, and Buell woman of Idaho, and Gordon Creek woman of Colorado. Morphological studies of her skull suggest traits distinct from later indigenous Mesoamerican populations, with some researchers noting similarities to early Paleo-American crania found elsewhere in the Americas. Her remains provide the human face, quite literally, to the type of people who may have carried out the hunts at sites like Santa Isabel Istapan. The relationship between the two sites is geographic as well as chronological. During the late Pleistocene, the basin of Mexico's lakes formed a single hydrological system, and travel between what is now Santa Isabel Istapan and the area where Penon woman was found would have been relatively easy, possibly just a few days on foot. Both would have been inhabited by communities exploiting the same suite of resources: fish and aquatic plants from the lakes, game from the surrounding plains, and tool stone from local volcanic outcrops. It is not unreasonable to imagine that Penon woman's community could have taken part in mammoth hunts, similar to the one preserved at Santa Isabel Istapan, or at least lived in a cultural tradition that valued large game hunting as a central part of life. Further linking these finds to the human history of the region are the Tlapacoya skulls, discovered on the shore of the former Lake Chalco in the southeastern part of the Basin of Mexico. These remains are slightly younger than Penon woman, dating to just over 12,750 years old, but they share the Paleo-American cranial morphology seen in other early finds. The Tlapacoya site also yielded a wealth of artifacts, including stone tools, which demonstrate that the people of the Basin of Mexico at this time were adept at exploiting a range of environments and resources. Tlapacoya's inhabitants fished, gathered plants and hunted medium and large game, suggesting a mixed subsistence strategy that may have evolved from the big game-focused hunting seen in earlier periods. The presence of mammoth hunting at Santa Isabel Istapan, alongside human skeletal remains like Penon woman and the Tlapacoya crania, paints a picture of a long-lived human occupation in the Basin of Mexico stretching from the late Pleistocene into the early Holocene. These were not transient migrants passing through on their way to South America, but communities adapted to highland life, capable of tackling megafauna and thriving in a complex lakeshore environment. The transition from the mammoth hunting days to the more diversified subsistence of the early Holocene was driven by atmospheric changes as warming temperatures and shifting precipitation patterns altered the lakes and the vegetation zones around them. As mammoths and other megafauna went extinct around 10,000 years ago, humans would have shifted towards smaller game, fish and plant foods, developing the regional adaptations that would later form the base for Mesoamerican agriculture. The mammoth remains themselves tell another part of the story. Columbian mammoths in central Mexico were adapted to the grassy open environments of the late Pleistocene basin. Their presence in such numbers indicates that the basin was a rich grazing ground. The skeletal remains at Santa Isabel Istapan include bones with cut marks, showing where muscles were sliced from the bone and fractures consistent with marrow extraction. The carcass may have been processed on the spot, with meat taken back to camp, perhaps located on slightly higher, drier ground near the lake. The hides would have been valuable for shelter coverings or clothing, and the ivory tusks could have been carved into tools or ornaments. In this way, a single mammoth represented a bounty of resources that could sustain a group for weeks. Linking the Santa Isabel Istapan mammoth hunters to the human remains found at Penon and Tlapacoya requires both archaeological evidence and informed interpretation. The Basin of Mexico's lake system meant that these communities were part of an interconnected landscape. People could move from one lake to another, sharing resources, exchanging goods, and perhaps even participating in communal hunts. The fact that the Penon woman's skeleton shows traits consistent with early Paleo-American populations supports the idea that the mammoth hunters belonged to an early wave of human settlement in the Americas, one that was widespread before later genetic and cultural changes reshaped the continent's populations. The Tlapacoya finds, slightly younger in date, suggest continuity rather than replacement. The tools and subsistence practices at Tlapacoya seem to build upon earlier traditions, with a broader focus on fish and smaller animals as the megafauna disappeared. This reflects an adaptability that was crucial for survival as the Pleistocene gave way to the Holocene. Yet, even as the prey species changed, the social and technological complexity required for large game hunting may have carried over into other communal activities such as cooperative fishing or large-scale plant harvesting. Chimalhuacan man refers to ancient human remains found in Chimalhuacan, a city in the Valley of Mexico, which have been dated to roughly 12,000 years ago, placing them in the late Pleistocene near the end of the last ice age. The discovery consisted of a partial skeleton alongside stone tools and animal bones from extinct species such as mammoths and camels, suggesting that these early inhabitants were hunter-gatherers adapted to a cooler, more open environment than the present-day highlands. The find is significant because it provides direct evidence that humans were living in central Mexico at the same time as large Ice Age megafauna, and it helps bridge the gap between older remains in North America and later Mesoamerican cultures. The Chimalhuacan remains are important in the broader context of early human migration into the Americas. Their age overlaps with other ancient skeletons, such as Penon woman and Tlapacoya man, indicating that central Mexico was already a well-inhabited region during the terminal Pleistocene. The tools found at the site resemble other late Paleo-Indian artifacts, implying a shared technological tradition across much of Mexico, and possibly links to the earliest Clovis and pre-Clovis cultures farther north. By combining human skeletal evidence with associated fauna and lithics, the Chimalhuacan man discovery supports the idea that early Mexicans had a mixed subsistence strategy, hunting large game while also exploiting smaller animals and plant resources, setting the stage for the cultural and environmental transitions that would lead to agriculture in the Holocene. Metro Man refers to the nearly complete 10,000-year-old male skeleton found during construction of the Mexico City Metro. The discovery was made when workers uncovered human bones embedded in ancient lakebed sediments, along with evidence of the once widespread system of lakes that covered the Valley of Mexico. The skull was remarkably well preserved and provided anthropologists with valuable information about the physical characteristics, diet, and lifestyle of early Holocene inhabitants of central Mexico. Radiocarbon dating placed him firmly in the period after the last ice age, when the climate was warming and megafauna were disappearing from the region. Metro Man's context suggests that the people of the Valley of Mexico at that time were semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers exploiting lakeshore environments rich in fish, waterfowl, and edible plants. His burial was not in a formal grave, but rather in the sediments of the ancient lake, which may have been a result of accidental death or a simple interment by his group. The find is significant because it adds to a series of ancient skeletons from the Basin of Mexico, including Chimalhuacan man, Penon woman, and Tlapacoya finds, that help archaeologists reconstruct human occupation patterns in central Mexico over the past 15,000 years. Together, these discoveries form a continuous archaeological record, of how early Americans adapted to changing climates and ecosystems in the highlands. In considering these sites together, we see a coherent picture of life in the Basin of Mexico at the very end of the Ice Age. Santa Isabel Istapan captures a frozen moment in time, the drama of a hunt preserved in bones and stone. Penon woman provides the human presence, the physical form of those who lived and died in this landscape. Tlapacoya reveals the adaptability and continuity of human occupation in the region as the environment and available resources shifted. Together, they demonstrate that central Mexico was a center of human activity from very early in the peopling of the Americas, not just a corridor to be passed through. The story of the 15,000-year-old mammoth hunting site in Mexico is not just about the extraordinary preservation of the successful killing of a giant animal. It is about a people who knew their land intimately, who could read the seasonal movements of game, who could craft sophisticated weapons from stone and bone, and who lived in communities capable of organizing cooperative hunts that required planning, skill, and shared labor. It is about how those same people left traces of their lives in the form of bones and skulls that we can still study today, linking the drama of the hunt to the broader arc of human history in the Americas. In the Basin of Mexico, the mammoth hunters of Santa Isabel Istapan, the woman from Penon, and the people of Tlapacoya all belonged to a world on the cusp of great change. The climate was warming, the Great Lakes would eventually recede, and the mammoths and other megafauna would soon vanish. Yet in that narrow window of time, they thrived in a landscape that was both rich and challenging, leaving behind a record that continues to reshape our understanding of the deep human past in the Americas.